simplicity and clarity. Your presentation should be simple. Now, simple doesn't mean lacking information. Simple doesn't mean uh, lacking professionalism. Simple means clear. Something that the audience can understand and anyone, anywhere in the world can understand. Remember we talk about who your audience is and what their knowledge about the topic is. And if they're professionals who know what you're talking about, let's say you're a doctor and you're delivering a presentation to doctors, maybe the language should be something that is clear and simple for doctors. But if you're talking to patients and you're a doctor, maybe something that is simple to you as a doctor and to your peers as doctors is not simple for a patient. A patient needs even more clarity. So keeping it simple to your audience, keeping it simple for people to understand what you're trying to say is key. All right. That's all I have to say at this time about simplicity. Let me move on to signposting. Signposting. What is signposting? What you see there, that picture there is a signpost. And what are signposts used for? Yes, signposts are used to guide you to wherever it is you want to go. This is a technique. Signposting is a technique used in delivering presentations. And to give you an idea of what signposting is, you need to imagine yourself driving. You as a driver, you in a highway. You in a highway in your car, driving alone. Now, your audience are all the cars behind you in that highway who are following you to your destination. That is your message. Where you're going from the beginning to the end is your message. That is your destination. That is the highway. Okay? Now, your audience are also following you in their cars alone, and they don't know the city. They don't know this highway. They don't know where they're going. They're new there. And the only way they can know what's going on and where to go, where to turn, when to stop, is if you let them know. So that's where signposting comes in. Signposting is how you lead your audience through your presentation. Have you noticed that before I move on to the next point, I mention what I'm going to be talking about? I don't click and then start reading. Actually, what I do is I say, let's say for example we're talking about simplicity, right? Before I finish talking about simplicity, I let you know that I'm finishing that idea and then I'm moving on to another one. And then I introduce the next one. And then I move on to that slide. And then I start talking about that slide. That signposting makes it easier for you to follow what I'm talking about. Okay? So let me show you some of the functions and some of the words, the expressions, the phrases that you can use to during your presentation to introduce ideas, to move on to other topics, to introduce examples. Let's see that. See, here we have the function for introducing the subject, and this is the language. You can say, I'd like to start by, or let's begin by, or today I want to start talking about this point. That's how you introduce a subject. Now let's look at the next function. Finishing one subject. It means that you are wrapping up, you're closing one idea, okay? So you say, okay, for example, I say, okay, today I want to talk to you about visual aids. That's how I introduce the topic or the subject. And then I say, when I finish, I say, okay, well, I've told you about visual aids, or that's all I have to say about visual aids. You as an audience, you receive that information as, okay, This guy is closing on that idea. He won't talk about that anymore. I move on to the next point, which is starting another idea. And then I say, well, now we'll move on to simplicity. Or next, let me talk to you about simplicity. So I introduce a topic or a subject, I finish that idea, and then I introduce another one. Okay? Are you following me? Can you understand how these phrases are used and what the point of signposting is when delivering a presentation? Let me move on to the next one. Analyzing a point and giving recommendations. This is the language there. Where does that lead us? Let's consider this in more detail. Or what does this mean for A, B, and C? These are like rhetorical questions that allow you to present one idea and then analyze it for your audience. You present the question and you answer the question yourself. The idea is that you put that idea in their heads. Okay? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Giving an example. Language for this is, for example, a good example of this is, or as an illustration. Now, there's many more words that you can use. These are just some ideas. You'll be able to look at them in more detail in the file that I'm sending you with this presentation. But in any case, whatever you say, you can also say as an illustration, or as you can see here on this picture, you're referring to your visuals. The idea is that you're using some special words, specific words, to introduce a function. Okay? You need to be clear about that. Alright, let me move on to the next point. Dealing with questions. This is key. Why? Because usually this is the part that almost everyone wants to avoid. You prepare your presentation, you know what you have to say, you know who your audience is, you know the topic, you know the time, you structure your presentation very well, you are doing signposting so people follow you, but there's something that you're not in control, and that's questions. Your audience can ask you questions about whatever. Of course, it'll be related to your presentation, usually. But how do you deal with that? You can't avoid your audience asking you questions. What you can do is, like I said at the beginning, you introduce the rules for questioning. So at the beginning you say, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if there's something you don't understand. And then you're telling them it's okay to interrupt me. You told them. But you may also say, well, I'll have some time to answer questions after my presentation is over. So you're telling them, please don't interrupt me. In a very polite way, you're telling me, don't interrupt me, ask me questions later. So these are ways to dealing with questions when people actually interrupt you and you don't want that. You can say, we'll be examining this point in more detail later on. Or, I'd like to deal with this question later, if I may. You can also say, I won't comment on this now, or I'll come back to this question later in my talk. The idea is that you don't say no. What you say is, not now, later. Right? So it's important that you're always open and ready to receive questions. But if they're not, if you don't want to answer them at that point, there's always a way out. And then maybe you can write it down. You can tell them, can you ask me that question later? It also gives you time. It buys you time to think about the answer, a better answer to that question that maybe you were not prepared at that right point. Okay? Let me move on to the next point, which is summarizing and concluding. And this is what you do when you're wrapping up your presentation, just like I'm almost about to do. And then you can use words like in conclusion, or I like to recap. Recap means summarize, recapitulate. Let's say summarize, and there are other words that you can use. You can say, for example, let's sum up, or if I can just sum up the main points here. Whatever expression that you use, the idea is that before you start summarizing or concluding, you let them know that that's what you're going to be doing. Alright? Okay, so let me start summing up what we did. In summary, there are three things you want to consider. Number one, and this is A in the ABCs of presentation, is what is your objective? Prepare for your presentation. You prepare for a presentation, you know what your objective is. You know what your objective is, then you can move on to thinking about the audience. You know who the audience is, then you can move on to thinking about the venue. You move on about the venue, then you move on to time and length, structure, use of notes, and all of that. It's important to prepare your presentation and think about the main points we talked about today. Second, you need to practice your presentation. If you don't practice your presentation, and this is B in the ABCs of presentations, you can never see what may arise. You can never correct something. You can never change something. If you think, okay, I'm going to talk about this point and I have this idea very clear in my mind because I know the topic, and then you go and you deliver a presentation but you never practice, there are going to be things that are going to come up and you never thought about. And you will look unprofessional. And you're not unprofessional, you just didn't practice, but people don't know that. So you need to practice, you need to rehearse your presentation. And number three, and to wrap up, you always need to summarize what you talked about. That is it, ABC, the C letter for ABCs of presentation. Why is it important to summarize? Because when you summarize, you more or less refresh the audience about the points you mentioned at the beginning. So today we talked about preparation, the objective of a presentation, the audience, venue, time and length, structure, use of notes, audience rapport, body language, cultural considerations, visual aids, simplicity, and signposting. In this summary, I am allowing you to refresh your ideas about the things we talked today, maybe reinforce any information that was not very clear, and I make sure that my message is well covered. Okay? So, without further ado, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention, and let me move on to the Q&A. Of course, during the Q&A session, people actually ask you questions, and you answer them in real time. But given the fact that this is a video and you can't actually ask me questions in real time, I'm going to give you my email, and that's rchurion@iels.com.be. Send me your questions to this email. Send me any comments you have, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Not in real time, but as soon as I can. Alright? So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to this presentation. This is Ronald Churion for IELS. Always happy to help you in delivering professional presentations.